On the surface, the lifestyle of the Connors family seemed picture-perfect. A beautiful home in a quiet, affluent neighborhood, 2 adorable young children, and a successful marriage. Brian Connors, a 38-year-old investment banker, and his wife, Amanda, 36, were the epitome of suburban success. But beneath this facade lay a marriage teetering on the edge of collapse, a relationship frayed by secrets and infidelity. Amanda had always been a devoted wife and mother. She had left her career in marketing to raise their children, Emily and Jake, who were 7 and 5 respectively. To the neighbors, she was the quintessential stay-at-home mom, always involved in school activities and community events. But the truth was that Amanda felt trapped and lonely. Brian's long hours at work and frequent business trips left her feeling abandoned, their once passionate relationship now reduced to cold, mundane exchanges. Brian, on the other hand, was thriving in his career. He was a man driven by ambition, often sacrificing family time to climb the corporate ladder. But his success came at a cost. His constant absence strained their marriage, and Amanda's growing resentment turned into bitterness. Desperate to rekindle the spark, they decided to hire a nanny to help ease Amanda's burden, allowing them more time together as a couple. That's when everything began to unravel. Enter Lily Thompson, a bright and bubbly 19-year-old college student who had been recommended by a family friend. With her infectious smile and easy rapport with the children, she quickly became a part of the Connors household. Lily's presence brought a new sense of joy and vitality to the home. She was caring, reliable, and always willing to help. But as the weeks turned into months, Amanda noticed a change in Brian. He seemed happier, more relaxed, and he started spending more time at home. At first, Amanda was relieved. She thought perhaps the family was finally returning to normal. But then she began to see the way Brian looked at Lily, the way he lingered in the kitchen when she was around, the soft laughter they shared. It was a subtle shift, but one that Amanda, with her growing paranoia and insecurity, couldn't ignore. It was on a warm summer evening when Amanda's suspicions solidified into certainty. She had returned home earlier than expected from a friend's gathering, and as she walked through the front door, she heard hushed voices coming from the living room. Creeping closer, she peered through the slightly ajar door and saw them, Brian and Lily, sitting close on the couch, their hands intertwined. Amanda's heart raced, a cold sweat breaking out on her forehead. She watched in silence as Brian leaned in and kissed Lily softly on the lips. It was a gentle, almost tender kiss, but to Amanda, it felt like a dagger piercing her heart. She backed away, her mind spinning, struggling to process the scene she had just witnessed. Her initial reaction was disbelief. How could Brian do this to her, to their family? Anger surged through her, mixed with a deep sense of betrayal. But instead of confronting them, she retreated upstairs, her emotions a swirling storm. She needed to think, to plan. Confrontation now would only expose her pain and vulnerability. No, she would wait. She would watch, and then she would make them pay. For the next few weeks, Amanda played the role of the dutiful wife flawlessly. She smiled, she laughed, she pretended everything was fine, but inside, she was seething with rage. She watched Brian and Lily closely, noticing every stolen glance, every fleeting touch. Her husband, oblivious to her newfound awareness, continued his affair with reckless abandon, believing his wife was none the wiser. Amanda's nights were sleepless, her mind consumed with thoughts of revenge. The idea of confronting them in a rage crossed her mind countless times, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. She needed to destroy them, to make them suffer as she was suffering. She began to document everything: text messages she found on Brian's phone, overheard conversations, even their late-night rendezvous when they thought she was asleep. Her plan was forming, a dark and twisted scheme that would bring their world crashing down around them. But Amanda was no fool. She knew she had to be patient, to bide her time. She would wait for the perfect moment, the moment when Brian and Lily least expected it. That moment came one rainy August evening. Amanda had followed Brian to a small hotel on the outskirts of town, a place she knew he used for his business meetings. But this time, it wasn't business that brought him there. She watched from her car as Lily arrived, her hair damp from the rain, and disappeared inside. Amanda's hands clenched around the steering wheel, her vision blurring with tears of rage. This was it. This was the proof she needed. As she sat in the dark, her thoughts turned deadly. She imagined all the ways she could hurt them, all the ways she could make them pay. And that's when the idea took hold. A terrible, irresistible idea. She knew Brian would be home late, and that Lily would be leaving before him to avoid suspicion. Amanda waited, her heart pounding, until she saw Lily leave the hotel and drive off. Then she followed her, all the way back to their neighborhood. Amanda parked a few houses down, watching as Lily walked to her apartment, oblivious to the danger lurking in the shadows. Amanda reached into the glove compartment and felt the cold steel of the kitchen knife she had taken from home. Her hands were shaking, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She stepped out of the car, the rain soaking her to the bone, and slowly made her way towards Lily's apartment. Amanda stood outside Lily's apartment door, her breath hitching in her throat. The soft light from the window outlined the shape of Lily moving inside, completely unaware of the fury that awaited her. Amanda's heart raced, adrenaline surging through her veins as she tightened her grip on the knife, the cold steel pressing against her palm. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, each scenario ending with Lily's terrified face as she begged for her life. But now, standing just a few feet away, the reality of what she was about to do washed over her, and for a split second, she hesitated. But then she remembered the look on Brian's face as he kissed Lily, the soft whisper of their laughter, and the rage flared up again, burning away any trace of doubt. She raised her hand and knocked softly on the door. Lily opened the door, her smile fading as she recognized Amanda standing there, drenched from the rain, her eyes wild with anger. Before she could react, Amanda shoved her way inside, slamming the door shut behind her. "Amanda, what are you?" The words died on Lily's lips as she saw the knife in Amanda's hand, the blade glinting in the dim light. She took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. "You thought you could steal him from me?" Amanda's voice was a low, dangerous whisper. "You thought I wouldn't find out?" Lily's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She glanced at the door, then back at Amanda, her mind racing as she tried to figure out how to get out of this alive. "Please, Amanda, it's not what you think," Lily finally managed to say, her voice shaking. "I never meant to. Don't lie to me." Amanda screamed, her voice echoing in the small apartment. She took a step closer, the knife raised. "I saw you. I saw everything." Lily backed away, her hands raised defensively. "Please, just let me explain. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." Amanda's eyes were filled with tears now, but her grip on the knife didn't waver. "You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything. You ruined my life." Lily took another step back, her eyes darting around the room, searching for something, anything that could help her. But the apartment was small and bare, and there was nowhere to run. "I love him, Amanda. I love Brian," Lily said, her voice barely more than a whisper. The words struck Amanda like a physical blow. She felt something snap inside her, and with a scream of rage, she lunged forward, the knife slicing through the air. Lily screamed and tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The blade caught her in the arm, and she stumbled back, crashing into the small kitchen table. Blood spattered the floor, and she clutched her arm, her eyes wide with terror. "Please, don't do this," Lily sobbed, but Amanda was beyond reason. She advanced on her, slashing wildly with the knife. The blade connected again, this time across Lily's shoulder, the force of the blow sending her crashing to the floor. Amanda stood over her, breathing heavily, the knife trembling in her hand. Lily looked up at her, blood pouring from her wounds, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Amanda, please," she whispered, her voice weak and desperate. But there was no mercy left in Amanda's heart. She raised the knife high, and with a guttural scream, she drove it down, plunging it into Lily's chest. Lily's body jerked once, twice, and then went still, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Amanda staggered back, dropping the knife, her hands covered in blood. She stared down at Lily's lifeless body, her chest heaving as the reality of what she had done sank in. The rage that had consumed her was gone now, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. She stumbled to the sink, her hands shaking as she turned on the water, trying to wash the blood away. But it was everywhere, on her hands, her clothes, her face. She looked down at the crimson water swirling down the drain and felt a wave of nausea rise up in her throat. What had she done? She had killed her. She had actually killed her. The thought was like a punch to the gut, and she doubled over, retching into the sink. Tears streamed down her face as she sobbed uncontrollably, the horror of her actions crashing over her like a tidal wave. But she didn't have time to break down. She had to think, had to get out of there before someone found her. Wiping her face with a trembling hand, she turned off the water and looked around the apartment. Her mind racing, she had to make this look like a robbery, something that would explain why Lily had been killed. She moved quickly, knocking over furniture, pulling drawers out of the cabinets, trying to create the illusion of a struggle. But it all felt so futile, so pointless. The blood on the floor, the knife lying in a pool of it. It was all too obvious. As she stood in the middle of the chaos she had created, she realized there was only one thing left to do. She had to disappear. She had to leave town, leave everything behind, and start over somewhere far away. There was no going back now. She had crossed a line, and there was no way to undo what she had done. She took one last look at Lily's body, lying motionless on the floor, and then she turned and ran out the door, the sound of her footsteps echoing down the empty hallway as she fled into the night. Amanda drove through the dark, rain-soaked streets, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her mind was a whirl of fear and regret, her thoughts racing as she replayed the scene in Lily's apartment over and over again. She had to get away, to put as much distance between herself and the crime as possible. But even as she drove, the enormity of what she had done was beginning to set in. She knew she needed to cover her tracks. Her clothes were soaked in Lily's blood, and she could already feel the cold, sticky fabric clinging to her skin. Panic surged through her as she looked around, searching for a place to pull over. She spotted a deserted gas station, the flickering neon sign casting eerie shadows in the rain. Pulling into the empty lot, she hurriedly stripped off her blood-stained clothes, stuffing them into a plastic bag she found in the back seat. She changed into a pair of gym clothes she kept in the trunk, her hands trembling as she struggled to get dressed. She tossed the bag into a nearby dumpster, hoping that it would be enough to buy her some time. Amanda got back into the car and drove on, her mind racing as she tried to think of what to do next. She needed to get rid of the knife, the murder weapon that still bore Lily's blood. She drove for miles, finally stopping at a remote stretch of riverbank. The rain was still pouring down as she stepped out of the car, her shoes sinking into the muddy ground. With shaking hands, she took the knife from her bag, its cold, metallic surface slick with rain and blood. She looked at it for a moment, the weight of her actions pressing down on her like a physical force. And then, with a sudden movement, she hurled it into the dark, churning water. The knife disappeared with a soft splash, swallowed up by the blackness of the river. Amanda stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where the knife had vanished, her heart pounding in her chest. It was done. There was no going back now. She had destroyed the evidence, and with it, any chance of redemption. But even as she turned and walked back to her car, a cold, sinking feeling settled in the pit of her stomach. She knew that no matter how far she ran, she could never escape what she had done. The next morning, the quiet suburb was shaken by the discovery of Lily's body. Her neighbor had found her door ajar and called the police after seeing the blood. The crime scene was a horrific sight, the signs of struggle and violence clear in every corner of the small apartment. Detective Mark Preston, a seasoned investigator with the Atlanta Police Department, was assigned to the case. As he surveyed the scene, it was immediately clear to Preston that this was no ordinary robbery. The brutality of the attack, the personal nature of the wounds, all pointed to a crime of passion. His suspicions grew when he found no signs of forced entry. Whoever had done this had been let in willingly. Preston knew this was someone close to Lily, someone she trusted. Over the next few days, the investigation intensified. Detectives interviewed neighbors, friends, and family, piecing together the events leading up to the murder. Amanda, playing the role of the grieving employer, was interviewed along with Brian. She spoke in hushed tones, her voice trembling with what seemed like genuine sorrow. But inside, she was barely holding it together, every question feeling like a knife twisting deeper into her guilt. It didn't take long for Preston to zero in on Amanda. Her behavior seemed off, her answers too rehearsed, her grief too forced. A deeper look into her phone records revealed late-night texts to and from Lily, messages filled with tension and jealousy. And then, the final nail in the coffin, security footage from a nearby store, showing Amanda's car leaving the area around the time of the murder. Amanda was arrested at home, the same house where she had imagined her perfect life with Brian. As they led her away in handcuffs, she caught sight of Brian standing in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. She wanted to scream, to explain that she had done it all for him, to protect their family. But the words wouldn't come. All she could do was stare at him, the man she had loved so much, the man she had destroyed everything for. In the end, Amanda Connors was charged with first-degree murder. The evidence was overwhelming, the trial swift. She was sentenced to life in prison, the judge's words echoing in her mind as she stood in the courtroom, her eyes empty and hollow. As she was led away, Amanda realized that she had lost everything. Her husband, her children, her freedom, everything she had ever cared about was gone, shattered in a moment of blind rage.